Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. So welcome to our second day for our workshop in the Americas and Caribbean time zone. So today we'll be discussing more about data processing, how to submit it to AmeriFlux, and also we'll have a look at data infrastructure and the Neon network. We have three speakers today. We have Jiahong Li from LI-COR. We have Justine Missik from High State and Claire Lange from Neon. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. So we'll start with Jiahong with an overview about well, I will leave the floor for you, but yeah, so we can have like we'll have like 15 to 20 minutes talk, then you can ask questions, and then we can at the end also have a discussion. So yeah, without further ado, Jiahong, if you'd like to start your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Tara. Let me share my screen first. And then, yeah, okay. Yeah, so minimize this view. So minimize. Okay. Hello, I'm Jiahong Li. Thank you for joining us for the workshop. Let me, sorry, move this since the screen is block the screen. Okay. Okay. Here. Just block the screen. Okay. Today we'll discuss eddy covariance data processing. We'll first introduce the basic principle and method of raw eddy covariance data processing, and then look at how to process EC data using Eddy Pro. At the end, we'll discuss how to understand the process of the EC data. From now on, we're using EC for eddy covariance. Data quality check is the first step in data processing. Here we listed the major tests we needed to go through. For example, we use an amplitude resolution test to check if the instrument has the required accuracy and speed. If the instrument is slow, we'll see step changes rather than instant changes for the sampled signals, as you see here. Despiking is part of the data quality check. The basic approach is the same as removing outliers in statistics using standard deviation and means, as you see from the table here. Despike uses move windows of 1/6 of flux averaging period with half window overlap. If 4 or more consecutive points are detected, they are not considered as spikes. Like you see from the graph, the data points in the blue circle are not spikes. Spikes can be removed or replaced with a linear interpolation. When we install an anemometer in the field, it needs to be perfectly installed. Otherwise, there will be bias in the vertical wind speed measurements. In reality, it's very hard to do that. For flat terrain, we're using 2D rotation to mathematically make the anemometer perfectly leveled. We first rotate the z-axis to make a mean lateral wind speed to 0, and then rotate y-axis to make a mean vertical wind speed equal to 0. For complex topography, it's really hard to find a flat plane. So we mathematically build a virtual plane, as you see here, to do a coordinate rotation. This method is called a planar fit. We need at least a month of data to do planar fit. That is different from 2D rotation. For 2D rotation, we do it in average in each average period. Time delay is an issue we need to address in data processing. When we use a data logger or other devices to log data, the electronic signals from different instruments may arrive with different time to the data logger. So we use a covariance maximization procedure to determine time delay. As you see from the two graphs here, we first calculate the covariance of the two signals, and that with the different time lags. When the covariance reaches the maximum, that's the peak, the true time delay is detected. Once the time delay is removed in the data, we can calculate the fluxes using the formulas you see here. But the results we got are not accurate due to some problem with the formulas. For example, sensible heat flux should be calculated using air temperature rather than sonic temperature you see here. CO2, water, or methane flux should be calculated using mixing ratio rather than density you see here. So we have to take actions to correct these errors. The difference between air temperature and the sonic temperature depends on specific humidity, as you see from the first equation. Once we know specific humidity, we can use the formulas here to easily do sonic temperature correction. That is for correct sensible heat flux. For flux measurement, we're using high sampling rate to catch small eddies and use a proper averaging period to catch larger eddies. But in the end, we still couldn't catch all the eddies. So the flux were underestimated. With the frequency response correction, we can estimate what we miss. To do that, we first consider the frequency response of sensible heat flux idea. It represents the true co-spectral of vertical wind speed and the sonic temperature, because both of them are measured by a anemometer simultaneously. There's no sensor separation, time delay, and other frequency response related issues. So with the true co-spectral and the configuration of the EC system, we can estimate the spectral attenuation of each flux and then correct fluxes. As you see from the formula here, in the fundamental equation of Eddy Covariance method, mixing ratio is required, but most analyzers measure density instead of mixing ratios. Density is affected by the variation in temperature and the water vapor. For example, if I have a certain amount of CO2 in a balloon, when temperature increases, the balloon will expand. The CO2 mixing ratio doesn't change, stay the same, but the CO2 density decreases. The WPL correction is for taking account of the effect of temperature and the water vapor fluctuations on gas density. Here are a picture and a graph from my colleague, Dr. Liu-Kang Xu, showing the magnitude of WPL correction. In California, grasses died off in summer due to lack of rain. without WPR correction, we can see the ecosystem was taking a significant amount of CO2. Even you see the grass on the surface of brown that died. Only after the WPR correction is applied, the CO2 flux became reasonable. From this example, we can see having proper corrections is really important in EC data processing. Flux quality flags are determined by steady state and develop the turbulence conditions test. Steady state means all the statistical parameters do not change with time. They stay stationary. For developer turbulence condition test, when the test parameter ITC is below 30%, we can assume the turbulence is well developed. So from those two sets, we can see the basic approach is to test whether the theoretical requirement for the eddy currents method are met or not, because the assumption for the eddy currents method is that we have a steady state and also have well developed turbulence. At the end of data processing, we also can estimate the flux footprint. We first calculate relative contribution, as you see from the top graph. We then integrate the relative contribution from the tower around the distance away from the tower to get the cumulative contributions, as you see from the second graph. So in summary, here are the basic data processing procedures. Each step needs to follow the order. So in data processing, the order doesn't matter. There are many software packages available for processing raw EC data. They are listed on AmeriFlux website, as you see here. And next, we're using Eddy Pro to demonstrate how to process EC data and also how to understand and process the EC data. Okay, let me stop here and we go to Eddy Pro. So, okay, I open the Eddy Pro. Here's the interface of Eddy Pro. To start, we first start up a new project. Let's give a name, demo. So, and save it. I really have a folder here and save it, replace, because I did a previous run using the same project name. So, okay. So the sample data we're using are in like a JGG format. If you have other raw file format, you can select from the list that you see here. The JGG files already contained metadata files, so Eddy Pro automatically selected use embedded metadata file. Metadata file contains the information on how your data are collected, like instrument height, sampling rate, and others. So if if you have other raw file format, you need to use alternative metadata file. So if I click here, you see the interface for metadata file popped up. There's a station, instrument, and also a file. So you need to provide the required information. Here we still use embedded metadata file. The JGG file also contains biometadata file. So I select biometadata file. If you don't have an embedded biometadata file, you can use external file or use an external directory to load your own biometadata file. Now let's move on to basic setting. Here, we set up raw data directory by clicking browsing, then go to C. The data, let's select it. Here we have a day of JGG file. So let's select it. Basically, we tell Eddy Pro where the raw data files are. Now we also need to set up output directory. This means we tell Eddy Pro where the output should be here. Go to here again, and then click the output here. The last step is to put an ID. This will be part of the output file so that we can easily find the output. So here, now actually Eddy Pro is ready to run with express mode. If I click, it will process the data, but we're not run with the express mode yet. The express mode using Eddy Pro default configurations, such as a 2D rotation. This is mainly for the 2D rotation. It does not output any spectral results. So if we want to use a planar fit and also want to get spectral results, we need to run Eddy Pro in advanced mode. So now let's go to advanced setting here. And in process option, we can select the planar fit. So if I come here, we can click, we can set up planar fit. But since we have only a day of data, we can't run planar fit. So we move back to 2D rotation here. And so here, this the settings that we have here. Here actually we can see all the method for data processing, like the flags we're talking about it, the spectral correction, what we're using, and also the output. So in advanced mode, you can change what you want to do. And for some new users, it's probably hard to do all the configurations. So the best way to do that, we click restart defaulting values here. As you see from the message, this will reset all the advanced settings to default settings. So we'll clear here. So this now we have all the default settings. Here, this is also what Eddy Pro express mode. So for output, we select all. Now we can process the data now. So if I run process, now Eddy Pro is running. Okay, while it's running in background, let's look at the output. Actually, I already have okay. So those are the output from a previous run. So the final correct flux is in full output here, this file. If we have biomet data file, the output is in biomet output file. The spectral results are in the top 4 folders: the band co-spectra, band OGI full co-spectra, and also the spectral analysis. If you want to know more, if you need to have more results, you can look at the FLUXNET and also these 2 statistical folders. They contain a lot of intermediate variables and their results. Let's just take a quick look at the output file here. So here we have the fully processed flux results and their quality flags. The gas densities and even the time lag, we talk about it, air properties, and the rotated wind speed, also like U star, the friction velocity, that is very important for post-data processing, the others. And the footprint, we talk about it. The uncracked flux, we said in the middle of calculation. The flags, the spikes, we're talking about it. Diagnostics from the instrument, covariance, and other parameters. So, okay, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiahong, for your presentation. We have a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll read them for you. So Luis is asking, is there any strategy to objectively define the wind direction sectors for the planar fit? That's the first question. And the second question, is there any strategy to evaluate how good the spectral correction is with respect to the local co-spectrum? In other words, how representative is the transfer function?
Okay. Yes, here for the first question, yes. The first question that usually we'll look at the surface. So for example, if you have just one slope, like one, you can just using one sectors. If you have 2 slopes, like here, this one is toward the one direction, another toward the 2 others, then you can divide it 2 sectors. But one thing I noticed that for planar fit is not the more the better, because we use the means of wind components to do planar fit. If we divide the footprint area into too many sectors, in each sector, there will be less data available. As you know, the planar fit is basically a regression. If we have a small amount of sample, then the regression will not good. So that's the basic strategy we can do it. For the second question, actually in the we can let me see here. We can quickly. So in this spectral analysis results, I would put your co-spectra, and there's another column is called basically modeled co-spectra, and also fitted. The modeled is if the 3 what your co-spectra is well in line with the modern fitted, that would be good. Another critical part is that we can look at the slope of the spectra. For spectra, the slope is minus 2/3. For co-spectra, the slope is minus 4/3. So if the slope is correct, then your spectral results are good.
Thank you, Jiahong. If no more questions, if you have further questions, you can put them in the chat, and then we'll make sure to go back to them at the end. So now we'll move to Justine to talk more about submitting data to AmeriFlux.
Is it on the right display this time?
We have
or
the
is it
presenter
swapped
view.
again?
Yeah, you have to sub them. Okay, yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so hello everyone, and thanks to the organizers for the invitation. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about processing and submitting data to AmeriFlux and focusing more on the process of submitting data and just things to keep in mind while you're doing that. So to start off, I think probably most people who've joined the workshop are probably at least somewhat familiar with AmeriFlux. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about benefits of sharing your data with AmeriFlux in case there are people who maybe have data from a site that isn't part of the network. And sometimes people can be hesitant about the idea of just sharing all of your data openly with everybody. But I think that there are a lot of benefits to doing this. So first of all, I think AmeriFlux has a really active community, and there you can find a lot of benefits by being a part of that. And sharing data from your site is a really good way to increase the visibility of your research, I think. And so more people will know about your work, and that also can bring about a lot more opportunities for collaborations and things like that. Also, by sharing your data, you have more opportunities for actually getting credit for your work. In AmeriFlux, when you publish data through AmeriFlux, they're going to create DOIs for all of the data sets that you've published, and then those data sets are now citable. So if people end up using your data for any of their studies, that's another way you're getting credit for your work. Having your data in AmeriFlux can be an easy way to fulfill data management or data publishing requirements, either from whatever grant of whatever funding agency you're working under probably has requirements about data management and data needing to be made public and things like that. And then also thinking about requirements for journals when you go to publish your work. Nowadays, it's not so common that you'll be able to get away with like not publishing data with your paper. And having data published in AmeriFlux is a easy way to take care of that. And of course, like, you can publish your data set in Zenodo or whatever when you publish a paper, but having it in, the data archive for this discipline has a lot of benefits and more visibility for your work and all of that. And then finally, like if you're participating in the AmeriFlux network, this does come with support from the AmeriFlux data and tech teams, and this can be really helpful. So it can be helpful for like figuring out different issues you might have going on with your instruments or like your data sets and things like that. And so it can help to improve like the quality of data that you're producing. So if you are working at a site that's not yet part of the AmeriFlux network, the first step would be to register your site with the network. And you could do this before you're ready to actually submit any data. And it's really a pretty easy process. So if you go to just the home page of AmeriFlux's website, there's a button that you can use to register a site, and it's really a pretty easy process. You just need to like provide some basic information about your site, and then the AmeriFlux team will like go through any like potential things that need to be dealt with. And then once your site is registered, every site in AmeriFlux will have this web page for the site on their website. So this is just the Oldham Creek site for an example, but then you'll be able to see a lot of different information about the site, what year's data are available for the site, and all of that, information about data citation, so like how to cite data from that site, publications that are using data from that site, and that sort of thing. And there will be options for the sites that you're managing where you can see information about the data processing for data you've submitted and things like that. So once you have your site registered with AmeriFlux, then the next thing is preparing your data for submission. So going along with this, kind of the first thing I want to talk about actually is just some issues to do with data and metadata management. And I think this is a thing that we can kind of not talk about as much often, but I think it's really important and will make things go a lot smoother. And so then you have to process your raw data into half-hourly or hourly fluxes for submission. And then you need to prepare your process data into the correct standard format for AmeriFlux. So I'm going to step back just a little bit and talk a bit about issues around data and metadata management. Because I think in my experience, I think it's really important to start thinking about this pretty early in the process, and that can end up saving you quite a lot of time and trouble. Because I think in my experience, like the actual process of data submission is really pretty straightforward. And like the AmeriFlux data team are fabulous and they're very responsive. And like once you're actually going through the submission process, if you have like any issues, like they're going to help you like work through any problems that come up and things like that. And so in my experience, I think really the biggest problems that I've run into or that I've seen people running into that are actually difficult to deal with have to do with just the way like data and metadata were being managed for their site. And so the problems are like tend to be more related to kind of losing important information about your data or about how you process the data and trying to figure out what happens with all of that. So in my experience, that's more of where the problems tend to come from, I think, that are actually like more difficult to figure out. So some things to consider like along these lines is that first of all, it's really important to spend some time in the beginning thinking about how you're going to be keeping track of site information and instrument information. And think about what information about the site and your instrument setup needs to be recorded, and thinking about if everybody who's working on the site is aware of what what information needs to be recorded. And going along with that, really making a plan for how this information is going to be stored and who will have access to it. So some things along those lines are thinking about, do you have an actual system in your lab for keeping track of like all of the instrument heights and depths for instruments that are installed and that sort of thing? And do you know which sensors are like actually actively installed on your tower? If you have sensors that were swapped with different sensors, do you know when they were swapped and things like that? And do you have a system for keeping track of field notes and like where are those going to be kept? And the reason why this is important is, for one thing, like you need to have metadata associated with your data. And I think it can be really easy, especially when you have, you know, different students and different postdocs working on the site, to have kind of a situation where, you know, you have more than one person working on things and you don't have an actual system, and some important information kind of just gets recorded in one person's field notebook that then gets lost and things like that. And then when you go back to it later, it's actually difficult to figure out like when exactly things happened, as far as maybe like instrument heights being changed, different instruments being installed and things like that. And so that's can be really difficult to deal with after the fact. And also things about like just knowing various things that happened at your site. Because sometimes what can happen is, you know, maybe 6 months later or something, you're actually looking at the data that came from the site and something is kind of weird in the data and you don't really know what happened. And by that point, like 6 months later, you can't remember what was going on at the site at that time. And you don't know, like, if suddenly this measurement is looking weird because the instrument was actually switched to a different instrument, or like what happened. So these things are important to keep track of. And then going along with that, some things to consider when you're dealing with the data processing for your site. Consider like how you're going to keep track of your data logger programs and things like that. So like, do you know when your data logger program might have changed, if it's been changed? And like, will you be able to tell like which data logger program was running, like for which period of time? And then thinking about how you will keep track of your actual data processing procedures. And and whether or not you're going to be able to reproduce your data processing procedures. So I think it can be kind of easy to go through like a bunch of steps of data processing and come out with the, your process data product and then later like not actually be able to reproduce those steps if you end up finding a problem. And then that can be a thing that takes a lot of time trying to figure out what happens. And then some other things to consider are related to data storage. And so think carefully about how your data is going to be stored and how it's going to be backed up. I would strongly advise having backups of your data and not just keeping one copy of it. And then how you're going to keep track of like your raw data and different process data products. So in my opinion, I think it's very wise to always keep a copy of your raw data that has not been touched in any way in case you need to like go back and redo some processing or things like that. And then with process data, like keeping track of how you actually produced the process data products, and if you actually are keeping track of what are all the specific processing steps that you perform to get to that product, and like whether or not you can reproduce it, or if you find like some issue, like if you know exactly what happened with that data product. And then also thinking about who in your team has access to the data. So are the data being stored in a way that like different people on the team can access, or do you have a system that's like, well, it's being backed up on like one student's hard drive or something, where really it's the data access is dependent on like that one person. So that's important to consider. And then finally, like thinking about knowledge transfer, and if you have personnel changes in your team, how you're going to deal with that. So like how are you going to transfer information if someone new joins your team, or if somebody leaves your team, like how is information going to be transferred? And are your data and metadata actually documented? And do you have information about your data, about your site, or metadata that actually isn't written down anywhere? And in my experience, this is actually kind of common, that there will be important things to know about a site or the way data was processed that's really just living in one person's head, and it hasn't actually been written down anywhere. Or maybe there was information that was written down, but it's in like one person's like personal notebook or their field notebook or something that other people don't have access to, and a lot of things can get lost this way. So a reason like I'm spending so much time talking about this is I think a lot of issues that actually come up when you're going to publish data and things like that are related to like information being lost or confused in some way. And you end up like, once you're actually going through all of the processing and everything, maybe realizing information that might be missing, or once you actually go through like data QA QC processes and all of that. And you're at the point that you actually are finding something that looks a little bit strange in the data set, like not having contextual information anymore to try and figure out like what actually was happening that was making the data look this way and things like that. So I think these things, like if you can spend some time in the beginning really like thinking about how you're going to keep track of all of this information and having like all of your metadata and stuff organized so you know where to find things, then once you actually get to the point of submitting data, things will go a lot smoother. Okay, so once you have all of your information organized and you have your Flux data processed and all of that, then you can go to the step of actually submitting your data. And this is also really pretty easy. If you go to the AmeriFlux website, there's under their like data section, there's the option where you upload data. And so when you upload your data, you need to upload both your half-hourly or hourly Flux data, but then also you need to upload your BATM. And so the BATM data is like ancillary information and metadata that gives information about different things about your site, different disturbance or management things that might have happened at the site. And then also your metadata around the data you're actually submitting. So like what kinds of sensors you have at the site, like the heights of sensors and all of that sort of thing, which is important to have with your data so that they can be actually interpreted correctly. So for your process like Flux data, really the main thing with this is that you need to just go through all of the requirements for AmeriFlux standard data format and make sure that you have everything just in the same standard. So that's mostly that you need to go through all of your variable names and make sure that you're using the standard variable names that are used for the AmeriFlux data products. And there's a page on the website that goes through like what all of the standard names are for all of the variables. So you just need to make sure that yours are named appropriately. And then you need to make sure that all of the units for all of your variables are using the units for the AmeriFlux standard. So these things are really not difficult to deal with. It's just you kind of need to kind of be careful, make a little checklist and make sure you've checked everything, that like all of the units are in the right units and everything is named properly. And going along with this, this is like one example of like if you have all of your metadata well organized, so you have like all of your data units and stuff really easily documented, and you don't need to go back and try and figure out what units things are in. Like this will have saved you a lot of time. And then for the BATM, there's another page in the website that goes through like different instructions for how you submit different information. So some of the basic site information you will have submitted like when you registered the site. but they have different instructions for if you have to edit your general site information, or you want to edit things about how authorship for the data set should be recorded. And then the heights and instrument models for your instruments, there's a tool that you can use to like enter all of the heights and instruments for your data set. And then also like if heights have changed, so if instruments have been moved around or anything like that, how you keep track of that. And then there's another template you go through if you're submitting things about like site disturbance or management, or more detailed things about instrument operations. And so all of those instructions are there in the website. So just to give a quick overview about the AmeriFlux processing pipeline once you actually submit data. So you have the site team, or like somebody from the site team will submit the BATM information and also your like flux and metadata to AmeriFlux. And then once you submit the data, it will go through their processing pipeline. So once you submit the data, it starts to go through different QA/QC steps. So it's going to check different things about the data format and stuff. And then it's also going to check more detailed things about the data itself. And if it finds things that look suspicious, for example, they might flag if at some point like your radiation measurements seem to be like offset, and maybe that happened because the time of your data logger got moved for daylight savings or something when it was supposed to be, and things like that. They can catch in the like data QA/QC process. So once your data like goes through the QA/QC process, you're going to get like reports from the AmeriFlux data team that tell you any issues or potential issues, or things they thought maybe you need to double check and see if there's any issues with. And so you can like look through the reports and then talk with the data team about like any issues that might have come up, and they're going to help you with like what you're supposed to do, and like anything you need to deal with if issues come up. And I think that it is pretty common to have issues come up, especially like the first time you submitted data for a site. So I think that's very usual. And the data team is going to be like very helpful with figuring out how to deal with those things. So then once it goes through the QA/QC process and everything is taken care of, it will be published as the base data product. So this is like basically the data that you've submitted, and then there's been QA/QC about data, general data quality things. And so this is the data product that's been like traditionally published in AmeriFlux. So probably what people are most used to. But now on top of that, there's also the option to do additional like OneFlux processing. So this is a newer thing in AmeriFlux that basically does the same like processing procedures that are consistent with the FLUXNET 2015 data set. So it adds a lot of additional processing and different data products to your data set. So it does additional QA/QC things, and more like gap filling, partitioning of flux data into like respiration and GPP and that sort of thing. So let's see. Yeah, so like for this data product, like being able to process your site's data through this pipeline is a newer addition to AmeriFlux. And it's going to produce a product that has gone through a bunch of like gap filling, partitioning, uncertainty analysis, and things like that. So basically, to like have your site's data be able to go through this processing pipeline, you first need to have your site's data published as a base product. And then there are required variables that need to be included in your data set for this processing to be able to run for your site. So there's a list of like which variables are required, which ones are strongly encouraged, and then there's additional variables that are suggested to include with that. And then also for your data to be processed, so you need the required variables to already be published, but then it's also important that you need to have the required metadata, like for these variables too. So this is another reason why it's important to keep track of your metadata. So you need to basically, for all of the variables that are required for OneFlux processing, you need to have all of their information updated, and they have this variable information tool. So this is just showing for Old Woman Creek kind of like what that kind of looks like. So you can update all of the information about your instrument models, and then the variable information. So you need to update like all of the heights or depths of your sensors, and you can add like dates when the sensors might have changed, or like when the heights or depths might have changed and things like that. And they have like video instructions or like written instructions about how to update everything. So it's really pretty painless, provided you have like all of your information together. So yeah, so then like once you have all of that together and your data can be published like through the pipeline, that's going to produce a data product that has a lot of additional value. So it will have different like partitioning calculations and things like that. And then you can use like those data products that are processed through OneFlux with like the rest of like FLUXNet 2015 data set, and that like will have gone through the same processing, so be comparable and everything like that. Okay, so that's all I have now for overview about the whole like submission process. So I guess I can take questions if there's
Yeah,
time.
thank you, Justine. So actually we have a couple of questions in the chat. So Olga is asking, dear Justine, can one register his site in AmeriFlux without providing data? And we have a question from Yusan. Is it possible to submit flux data for a gas species not found in AmeriFlux variable list?
Yeah, so for the first question, yeah, so you can totally register your site before you have any data ready to submit, or maybe even like if you're just starting to set up the site and you don't really have data collected. So you can go through the registration process beforehand, and then everything will be like ready to go once you actually have your data ready to submit. I'm not certain, but I think it's maybe something like you have 3 years after registration to submit data before they mark your site as being dormant or something like that. But I think if that happened, you can also just like talk to them and they could like reactivate the site or whatever. But yeah, usually I think it's a good idea to like go ahead and get your site registration taken care of like earlier. And then what was the second question? Sorry.
Is it possible to submit flux data for a gas species not found in AmeriFlux variable list? And there's the list in the chat. I mean, it links you to the variables.
So I believe so. I think there are ways to submit, like if you have different variables that aren't included in the variable list, you can still submit things. I think when that happens, usually like what you should do is ask the data team about it beforehand. And they like will help you like figure out what is the best way to proceed with that. So yeah, the data team is very responsive and helpful if you have like specific situations going on with your site you have questions about.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Justine, for presentation. And if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat, and then we can go back to them in the end. So now we'll be moving to Dr. Claire Lange. So we'll be well, knowing more about NEON data and infrastructure to understand changing ecosystems. So please, Dr. Claire, go ahead.
Thanks. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm a data scientist working at NEON. I'm going to change direction a little bit from the previous two talks, introduce you to NEON, and then talk a little bit about NEON's data processing, and then sort of try to get you thinking about what you might do with all of these large networked data. So the previous two talks were really focused on processing and submitting your own data. And this talk is going to be more about taking advantage of all of the open data that's out here in our community. Okay, so what is NEON? NEON is a network of 81 sites distributed across the United States, and that includes Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. 47 of those sites are terrestrial and 34 are aquatic. They are distributed in 20 ecoclimatic domains. So each domain has at least 2 terrestrial sites. Sorry, that's not totally true. Hawaii only has 1. Every other domain has at least 2 terrestrial sites. And most domains have 1 or 2 aquatic sites. The flux towers are only at the terrestrial sites, but there is a flux tower at every NEON terrestrial site. But fluxes are not the only thing that NEON measures. So in total, NEON is collecting more than 180 data products. And I'm just going to give, sort of a general overview of what those data products are. I obviously don't have time to go into detail on 180 data products, but I'm happy to take any questions about specific data. So this figure is sort of an imagined NEON site if every possible NEON measurement were happening in one place at one time. It is extremely not to scale, but you can see, there's a tower, there's a stream with some instrumentation in it. We've got a person making some direct measurements, and we've got a plane flying overhead. So we typically divide NEON data collection into 3 very general categories. So first is the instrumented system. So this is streaming sensors. They're installed in the field and they are just constantly transmitting data. The observational system, this is everything collected by a human. So that can be, a direct measurement, like measuring the diameter of a tree, or that can mean collecting a physical sample, like a soil sample, that then gets sent out for analysis. And the third group is the remote sensing system. So this is the airborne platform. It's a low altitude aircraft monitoring reflectance. And just to give a little bit more details about what each of these systems measures. So the instrumented system, that includes the flux towers, so monitoring of carbon and energy fluxes, sort of basic meteorology, things like radiation, temperature, precipitation, hydrology in the aquatic sites, all those sorts of things. The observation system is monitoring target taxonomic groups, things like plant biomass and production, biogeochemistry in plants, soils, and aquatic systems, and a little bit of microbial sequencing and a little bit of disease sequencing as well. And then the airborne platform has both a LiDAR and a hyperspectral reflectance instrument, as well as a very high resolution digital camera. So that's kind of the overall picture. And again, if there are detailed questions about specific data, I'm happy to answer them. So that was the very quick and dirty overview of NEON data. In addition to the data that NEON collects directly, there's also the opportunity to sort of add on by taking advantage of NEON infrastructure. So this is, for example, you can hire a NEON plane to fly over your site, some location that NEON doesn't fly over by default, and collect the same types of data over that region as we get at the NEON sites. Similarly, you can hire a sort of mini tower to come and be set up temporarily in a location where NEON doesn't have a tower. The reason that I use the word hire when describing both of those things is that these are PI-funded activities. So you do have to, get a grant to cover the cost of doing this work, but it may not be cheap. It is definitely much, much cheaper than getting your own plane and putting your own instruments on your own plane. So that's sort of where you're taking advantage of the infrastructure that NEON already has. There's also, as part of this same program, you can attach your own instruments to NEON towers. So if there's, a sensor measurement that you are interested in that NEON doesn't measure, there's the opportunity to do that. For all of these things, obviously, talk to people at NEON as soon as possible, because there are going to be considerations around, where else is the plane supposed to be? What else is attached to the tower? And, how would your additional instrument fit in? We just have to take all that into account when you are writing your proposal. So that's basically when you start thinking about writing a proposal is when you should reach out to NEON to talk about this, because you need to have all of that worked out before the proposal is funded. But we encourage that. Reach out, talk to us about this. There are lots of exciting opportunities here. And then in addition to that sort of add-on, there's also the add-on that NEON has an extensive biorepository of physical samples available. And what is really exciting about this is that this is different from a lot of museum collections in that these samples are available for destructive analyses. So, if, again, there's something that you are interested in measuring, say in, soils across 47 sites across the United States, and it's something that NEON doesn't measure, you can talk to the biorepository and, have a grant of your own to analyze whatever that component is in the samples that are available from the biorepository. And I would say, at this point, NSF is very excited to fund work to take advantage of these samples. So I think now is a great time to get funded to do this kind of thing. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about data processing. So, the process of getting from, a tower in the field to data that you can download from the NEON website. So this is sort of a schematic of the sensor monitoring system that NEON operates. Definitely, you are not expected to follow every arrow on this diagram. The idea here is just to give you an idea of sort of the constant feedback between the sensors, the infrastructure, and people monitoring these things. So a lot of sort of the top of this slide is actually focused on things that happen before the data are collected. So, all of the instruments have to be calibrated. There's, engineering to make sure that the towers are set up and maintained properly. That all feeds into, the tower being set up with appropriately calibrated instruments set up on it. And then, things go wrong in the field, and there are alerts that go through a ticket management system to make sure, that people get alerts, that there's a system to track when things go wrong. And basically that you get constant feedback about how the instruments are operating in the field. The next slide is going to zoom in on the bottom of this figure. So now looking really at, okay, so then what happens after the data are initially collected? So you have a sensor in the field. Hopefully everyone can see my mouse as I'm pointing stuff out. That sensor is, collecting data in the instrument hut that is on site in the field. Data are transmitted from that to the centralized NEON database. There, they go through processing and end up in another portion of the database. Then there is a publication layer that sort of packages and formats the data, and then they get published to the data portal. Now, this step here of taking the raw data and making it into something processed, that is really the process that Jiahong was talking about in the first presentation is, the basic process that we're all familiar with of, getting raw data into calculated fluxes. And so the software that NEON uses to make those calculations, to calculate the fluxes, is the Eddy 4R package. That is publicly available on GitHub if you are interested in either using it or just understanding better the algorithms that NEON uses to produce the flux calculations. Okay, so then at this point, I'm going to turn to talking about what happens beyond the data portal. So the data that NEON publishes for the flux data is half-hourly fluxes. And so, what else is happening with those data beyond what NEON publishes, and what might you think about doing with them? So NEON is in partnership with AmeriFlux. All NEON terrestrial sites are registered as AmeriFlux sites, and all of them have submitted data to AmeriFlux. So if you want to use NEON data, but you want to use it, in conjunction with other AmeriFlux data or formatted the way that AmeriFlux data are formatted, you can access NEON data through AmeriFlux and do that way. We have, up until recently, only had the half-hourly fluxes published to AmeriFlux. AmeriFlux has been working on generating the gap-filled and partitioned data products. I believe that has been published for at least one NEON site, and there are several others that are pending. So very soon that sort of enhanced and improved data will also be available through AmeriFlux. Another partnership, so this is a collaboration with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, here in Boulder. NCAR runs the Community Land Model, or CLM. And so folks have been working on a collaboration to incorporate NEON data through, data integration and data assimilation into the Community Land Model to improve that model by direct comparison to NEON sites. That project has also generated gap-filled NEON flux data, which are also available to the public. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. There's also a little interactive tool that lets you look at a comparison between fluxes measured by NEON and fluxes, predicted and estimated by the Community Land Model. So that's I think a really interesting project if you're interested in sort of larger scale land surface modeling. Okay, so now to talk about what you all might do with all of these open public data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 papers that were published recently using NEON data. I'm just going to give very quick highlights, and really the idea is just to kind of give you a taste and start you thinking about the possibilities for working with these data. So I think, the possibilities with NEON are really broad because you have data collection across such a large climate space, standardized data over time, and also a really wide variety of data types within a site. And so all of those components, I think, can get you to really large scale questions that are really exciting. And I should say, of the 4 papers that I'm going to talk about, only 2 of them are actually about fluxes. One of the things to keep in mind is that there's other data available from NEON that you might be interested in independent of fluxes, or that might inform what you're doing with flux data. Okay, so this first paper is looking at solar-induced fluorescence as a predictor of GPP. So this is basically looking at GPP as it relates to SIF versus other predictors of GPP at 2 boreal sites. So here, what they're doing is really taking advantage of that depth of data at a single site. So, having these fairly extensive measurements at a given site gives you more opportunities to explore, more predictors and more possible drivers of the phenomena you're interested in. This second paper came out this year. This one is really exciting to me because I think the time series aspect of NEON has always been really exciting. That NEON is intended to operate for 30 years, and we want to be able to see long-term change. But at the start, you don't have that time series. You're just getting started building that time series. And this is really one of the first papers I've seen where there was a long enough time series to do a study over time using NEON data. So this is looking at tree mortality in California over about a 10-year period. So using the fact that NEON has flown and collected LIDAR and reflectance over forests in California starting in 2013. And if you think about 2013 through 2020, some of those were some really severe drought years for California. And so what they're doing here is trying to estimate mortality from those LIDAR and reflectance data. And just sort of briefly, this is the soap root saddle and tea kettle sites of neon. Tea kettle is significantly higher in elevation, and they're estimating much higher mortality at the lower elevation site. Okay, this paper is looking at soil fungal communities. So using the soil microbial sequencing from neon data. And what's exciting to me about this paper is it's one that really takes advantage of the enormous climate space that neon occupies. So, neon sites are across the United States. Obviously, the United States covers an enormous range of temperature and precipitation and all of those sorts of things. And so they used that huge range to do some niche modeling of soil fungal communities. And we're able to estimate that soil fungi in boreal forests in particular are kind of at the very edges of their niche space. And so potentially are especially vulnerable to climate change. Okay, and then this final paper is looking at surface energy balance in the Arctic. What is great about this paper is this is actually using several AmeriFlux sites across the Arctic, and the neon sites are just knitted in seamlessly. So this includes, sites that are part of the neon network, sites that are part of the AmeriFlux network, but not part of neon, and it's all one data set. Looking at the influence of the underlying vegetation type on surface energy balance and changes in surface energy balance with, changes in climate and warming and that sort of thing, to predict how those responses will be mediated by vegetation. And if you're interested in, digging more into any of the papers I just talked about very briefly, or, checking out other papers that have been written using neon data, this is the place on the website. There's an impact area of the website, and you can go to papers and publications and check out what's there. There's getting to be more and more all the time. Okay, and then I just want to close out by talking briefly about resources that are available to help you get started using neon data. So there is a getting started webpage that you can go to that has a bunch of suggestions for places to start checking out neon data. We have a whole set of data tutorials that introduce you to sort of basics of neon data access, data wrangling, and how to get going with different types of neon data. We often teach workshops and seminars. We have a seminar and workshop series that will be starting up again in the fall. And a lot of those are recorded and are available on the Neon YouTube channel. So you can check those out even if you can't make them in person. Those are all resources for sort of, neon in general, neon data writ large. There is also a details page for every data product that has information about how that product was collected and processed. The link I've put here is just the link to the Eddy Covariance data product, but each one has its own page. This is sort of the flip side of what Justine was talking about. She really emphasized the importance of the metadata, collecting and tracking your metadata. Here, what I want to emphasize is there is a whole lot of metadata available for all of this public data. You should, check it out and read it. You will learn incredibly valuable things from reading the documentation about all of these data products. And finally, just Neon staff are also a resource for you. If you have questions, if you're working with Neon data, or don't know where to start, or have an idea about what you'd like to do, feel free to reach out. We are always very happy to talk to members of the community. That is what we're here for.
Thank you, Dr. Lunch, for your presentation. Yeah, please, if you have questions, just go ahead and ask or put it in the chat. I have a quick, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I saw that something came in the chat, but I see that was a general thing. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a question about using Neon's data with CLM. So I'm guessing it's for validating. I mean, it's used to like validate the output of CLM. Is that the case? And also, are you using it for global simulations or site simulations?
Those are great questions. I might have to direct you to other folks for those. I'm not super familiar with the sort of data assimilation techniques. I think the idea is that you use the data for validation, but also then to inform and improve the model. But I am a little fuzzy on the details because I'm not directly involved in that project, but I can point you to the people who are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just want to point out the comment in the chat. So Olga is asking, dear speakers, please share your presentation if possible. If you agree, I would like to demonstrate some of your slides to students with a reference to you and this seminar. So if you'd like to you can drop them in the Slack, I think, in the Slack channel. So yeah, everyone can have access to them. Yeah, I mean, if no more questions, I think. So, well, thank you for everyone. Thank you, especially for our 3 speakers for this very nice workshop and presentation. So I would just a reminder of tomorrow is our last day. So it's the same time. We're basically gonna hear from 3 speakers as well about application of Eddy covariance data and ecosystem and regional and global modeling, also like use of this data. Yeah, I mean, thank you everyone for being with us, and yeah, special thanks for our speakers, and hope to see you tomorrow. Have a good day.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you.